Long before freezers, refrigerators, or supermarkets, surviving the winter was one of the greatest challenges humans faced. Entire villages depended on one simple question: could they store enough food to last until spring? This was a world of shifting climates. The Great Ice Age was slowly receding, leaving behind a scarred but resource-rich landscape. But even as the glaciers retreated, they left a legacy of brutal, unpredictable winters that could crush the unprepared in a matter of weeks. You live in a small settlement near the sea, in a time when the Great Ice Age is slowly fading, but winter is still brutal. Your father once told you stories passed down through generations, stories of frozen years when entire tribes vanished because they failed to prepare. Those memories still guide your people today. Location was everything. The sea offered a buffer against the extreme interior cold, but it also brought violent storms. Your people learned to read the tides and the flight patterns of birds as early warning signs of the changing seasons. Every cave and outcrop was mapped in the collective memory of the tribe. Life in your village revolves around survival. When the weather warms, everyone has a role to play. You and your sons travel across forests and open plains, hunting wild animals and bringing back whatever you can find. Meanwhile, your wife teaches your daughters the skills she learned from her own mother, gathering plants, planting seeds, and caring for the fields that surround the village. Hunting wasn't just about strength, it was about endurance. A single hunt could last for days, tracking a wounded animal across dozens of miles. Every kill was a victory for the entire community, providing not just meat, but bone for tools and hides for warmth. Nothing was ever taken for granted. Every spring begins the same way. The soil softens after months of frost, and the villagers rush to plant barley, wheat, and small root crops. It takes months of patience, watering, and careful tending before anything grows. But even with all that work, the harvest always depends on nature, and nature does not always cooperate. This wasn't individual farming, it was a communal battle for existence. The children were taught to recognize weeds from crops at an early age, and the elders directed the irrigation of the fields using primitive channels carved into the hillsides. The entire survival of the social structure rested on these fragile sprouts. As the leader of your small community, the responsibility weighs heavily on your shoulders. You've seen other villages fail before. Some harvested too late, others wasted too much food early in the winter. A few simply had terrible luck. Those villages are gone now. Your people look to you for direction. If the food stores last until spring, everyone survives. If they don't, the consequences are unthinkable. The landscape is dotted with the ghosts of those who came before. Crumbling stone circles and overgrown storage pits serve as silent warnings. You've mapped these failures, studying the terrain to understand why they succumbed. Was it lack of drainage? Poor sun exposure? These ruins are the textbooks of your survival. Because winter here is more than cold, it is silence. The ground freezes so hard that nothing grows. Animals disappear, rivers freeze. Hunting becomes dangerous and unpredictable. Without stored food, starvation arrives quickly. That is why preparation begins long before the first snow falls. As autumn approaches, the village becomes a place of constant activity. Hunters return with deer, boar, and smaller animals. The women prepare the crops and gather berries from the nearby woods. Every piece of food must be used carefully. Nothing can be wasted. Fresh meat is delicious, but it spoils quickly. If left alone, it will rot in just a few days. Long ago, your ancestors discovered a solution: drying. Drying was a delicate science of air and light. The racks were positioned to catch the maximum breeze while keeping the meat out of reach of scavengers. Small, smoky fires were often kept underneath, not to cook the meat, but to keep the flies away. Every strip was checked daily for any sign of spoilage, a task requiring incredible focus. After a successful hunt, the animals are carefully cleaned. The meat is cut into long, thin strips and hung on wooden racks. For days, the sun and wind slowly pull the moisture from the flesh. Eventually, the meat becomes tough and dry, turning into something similar to jerky. It may not taste as good as fresh meat, but it can last for months. But drying alone is not enough. Your village sits near the sea for an important reason: salt. While the ocean water itself cannot be drunk, it hides something incredibly valuable. Large clay pots are placed over roaring fires filled with seawater. Slowly, the water boils away, turning into thick clouds of steam that rise into the air. When the water finally disappears, small white crystals remain at the bottom of the pot: salt. In this era, salt was more than a seasoning. It was a currency of survival. Tribes from the interior would travel for days just to trade for for a single pouch of these crystals. The boiling process was grueling, requiring huge amounts of firewood and constant attention, but the reward was the ability to freeze time itself for their food supplies. The villagers rubbed this precious mineral deep into the dried meat before wrapping it tightly in hides. Salt pulls moisture away from bacteria, stopping the meat from spoiling and allowing it to survive the long winter ahead. It also makes the food taste far better when the cold months arrive. But meat is only one part of the village's survival. Another valuable food source comes from high in the trees: wild honey. Collecting honey is dangerous work. Even as temperatures drop, the bees fiercely protect their hives. The gatherers wrap themselves in thick furs and climb carefully toward the honeycombs, smoke drifting upward to calm the angry swarm. Your people had become expert observers of the natural world. They knew which smoke would calm the bees and which would drive them into a frenzy. They understood the seasonal cycles of the hives, knowing exactly when the honey would be at its thickest and most nutrient dense. This was the high energy fuel of the ancient world. The reward is worth the risk. Honey provides quick energy during the winter, something desperately needed when food becomes scarce. But the villagers also discovered something remarkable about it. Honey almost never spoils. When berries are placed inside jars of honey, they remain edible for months, sometimes even longer. During the coldest days of winter, those sweet berries can lift the spirits of an entire family. Still, even with dried meat and preserved fruit, the village must store large amounts of food safely. If animals or moisture reach the supplies, everything could be lost. That is where the storage pits come in. Before the ground freezes solid, the villagers dig deep holes in the earth. Each pit is lined with hides and packed carefully with food: grains, tubers, dried meat, and preserved berries. These were the high-tech vaults of their day. The straw acted as insulation and moisture control, while the animal hides provided a barrier against pests. Some pits were even designed with hidden entrances to protect the tribe's wealth from rival settlements. The earth itself was their greatest ally, maintaining a steady, cool temperature that kept decay at bay. Once winter arrives, the frozen ground acts like a natural refrigerator. The food stays cold and protected from spoilage. Some pits belong to individual families, while others store supplies for the entire community. These hidden caches often mean the difference between survival and death. Fishing also becomes an important part of preparation. Before the lakes and rivers freeze over completely, the hunters carry nets into the water. The catch is rarely huge, but every fish matters. The fish are cleaned and filleted, their meat salted just like the game animals. Even the bones are saved. Later, they will be boiled into soup, providing extra nutrients during the harshest weeks of winter. The sea was a relentless but generous provider. By mapping the coastal currents, the villagers could predict where the schools of fish would congregate as the temperatures dropped. They constructed elaborate stone weirs and fiber nets, engineering their environment to maximize every possible calorie. This was the final layer of their defense against the coming cold. By the time the first frost arrives, the village has done everything possible to prepare. But this year, nature has other plans. One morning you wake before dawn, feeling a strange chill in the air. Something feels wrong. When you step outside your shelter, the sight before you makes your stomach drop. Frost covers the fields. The cold arrived far too early. The wheat bends under a thin layer of ice. The barley stalks have turned brittle overnight. Many of the plants will not survive this sudden freeze. You shout for the villagers to begin harvesting immediately. Whatever can be saved must be gathered now. Men, women, and children rush into the fields, pulling crops from the frozen soil as quickly as possible. But as the piles grow, you can already see the truth on their faces. This harvest is far smaller than expected, far too small. When the food is finally stored away, the numbers are clear. The village does not have enough to last through a full winter, not even close. You and your sons increase your hunting patrols, traveling farther each day in search of larger animals. The risks grow higher, but there is no other choice. Winter arrives soon after. The winds become fierce, cutting through even the thickest furs. Snow buries the paths between shelters. Fires must burn. The map was now your only hope. You pushed the boundaries of your known world, exploring uncharted valleys in a desperate search for migrating herds. Every mile traveled was a gamble with death. But staying in the village meant certain starvation. This was the true test of your leadership and the tribe's collective will to survive.